Is anything changed?
Yeah, it's good to be back. I wouldn't really say anything's changed besides a few relationships, but no, I don't think everyone still plays pretty similar and everything's going along as it had been, so it's good.
And you don't think taking that time away from poker has affected you negatively at all or anything like that?
Oh, I mean, you probably lose a few reads on the people you're playing with, but I wouldn't say too much.
Okay. Well, now let's get into a little bit of strategy, if you don't mind. So, I mean, for all of these questions that I'm about to ask you, let's kind of take as granted that many hands are going to really be player and situation dependent. So, what is the best advice that you can give for playing in the early level of tournaments?
Yeah, I think the general consensus is to play pretty tight, and I certainly agree with that. I don't play very loose in the early levels. I would say that quite a few players that I play with, they play a bit too straightforward, and it's very easy. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people who will only ever sort of re-raise with kings or aces, and while that's a fine strategy, I mean, you don't get knocked out much at the same time. You're not really taking advantage of situations and being unpredictable, which can help your chances of accumulating chips. So, but I would certainly say just be quite tight before the antes come in.
Okay, and I mean, you're saying that the general consensus is to be tight, but considering that's the general consensus, does that mean that more often than not you should? I mean, usually it's the case that if everyone's saying you should do something, then you should do the opposite because no one's doing that. Is that not the case here?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there's just sort of less reward because obviously the pots are so small that if you try to take advantage of that, you can often just find yourself in trouble. But I think you certainly can, to a certain extent, exploit that.
And I guess I suppose that even if it's the general consensus, there may be enough weak players out there that are trying to be trickier and being loose enough that you can pick them off and hold your own well enough.
For sure.
So, what is the biggest misconception then maybe that people are having about optimal strategy in early stages? Like, what are the biggest mistakes that people are making?
Do you mean the regulars or the fish?
Well, both, actually. I mean, if you think that the regulars, the people that think they know what they're doing, are making mistakes, then what kind of mistakes do you think that they're making?
Yeah, I suppose I wouldn't say so much mistakes, but they're just sort of, they're very straightforward, and it's very easy to know sort of when they're going to have a hand, what range they're going to have, because nothing sort of changes ever, and I mean, most of the regulars seem to just play the early stages pretty much on autopilot, so whereas, I mean, obviously the fish are limping a lot and doing a lot of the dumb stuff that we're all familiar with, but yeah, I would say that the regulars probably are a bit too predictable in the early levels.
Okay. And as far as the regulars being predictable, I mean, to maybe give kind of a behind the scenes on that, is that likely just because they're playing so many tables at once that they aren't really they are playing on autopilot, like you said, because they aren't deep in any of these tournaments, so they aren't giving as much focus to them?
Yeah, certainly possible. Yeah, I would agree with that, but at the same time, you don't see them play too much differently if they're just playing one table. But
okay.
I mean, definitely if you're playing a lot of tables, there's sort of not really room to be totally creative.
Okay. And as far as the weak players, the non-regulars, let's call them, you say they're limping into a lot of pots. How exactly is that getting them in trouble? In what ways?
Yeah, I mean, the regulars will just sort of raise them in position, and they'll sort of just be leaking a lot of chips because obviously you don't hit the flop half the time, so you only hit a third of the time, obviously, so just sort of leaking chips where they just limp and call before the flop and check and fold when they don't hit, so, and then they tend to because they're limping in with weak hands, they tend to overvalue their hands post-flop. If they flop top pair or something with a weak kicker, they sort of can't get rid of it, and just making mistakes that way.
Okay. So then, in your opinion, what is the best strategy to combat those kinds of people?
Yeah, I mean, generally you just play position against them and build the pot before the flop so you can take the chips uncontested when they miss the flop, and which is going to be most of the time, so that'll be profitable in itself, besides when they make mistakes when they have hands.
Okay. So basically continuation bets and getting them to check fold.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, flopping monsters against them and trying to get them to overvalue their cards, like you were saying.
That helps too.
And now, you always hear about kind of being aggressive on the bubbles and pretty much throughout the later stages of the tournaments. Can you add anything to that advice? Because it's kind of general, like saying just be aggressive in these stages. What can you add to that advice to maybe focus the meaning?
Yeah, well, I mean, my advice would be don't overestimate it. I mean, I just watched the 100 replay yesterday, and I mean, most of the guys there are sort of regulars, and the bubble's not such a big deal, and you get a hand where someone's open raising, and a big stack re-raises them, and then the chip leader comes over the top 4 bets from behind with queen deuce offsuit, and gets snap called and loses most of his chips on the bubble. So you see a lot of really stupid things happen on the bubble, and I think it's really overestimated, but there are definitely times to be aggressive, but I would suggest that it's more, it's going to be a better strategy to do it in like some really big tournaments, like, I mean, probably the World Championship Online Poker main event or something like that, where there's a lot of satellite players who the money is really significant to. That's where you're going to get the really scared players, and I try to take advantage of it then by obviously opening the pots and playing back at the big stacks who you suspect are trying to abuse the bubble as you want to as well. So I'd just be careful of doing it in tournaments where the money's perhaps not as significant to the players as you might think.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right. Well, that's all the questions I've got for you. I really appreciate you getting on the phone with us all the way from Australia to do this interview. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Sean.
And thank you guys for watching The Online Zone on Card Player TV.